Right, so it's been a pretty sensational week this week, so much so that I'm struggling to choose what to put into this virtual safari. Some of the highlights include the return of the Tsalala female after having killed an enormous kudu bull right in front of camp. The Makomsava female is suspected to have some cubs, and we find her in the north and we follow her for a short while, thinking that she's taking us back to a den. We know the Ximungwe female is denning somewhere in the south, and we hope to then follow her back to a den after she had just killed a duiker. And lastly, but by far the most exciting sighting of the week, is we follow the Ndzhenga Males as they charge into a clash with the plains camp males. So thanks for joining us this week, and sit back and enjoy. Right, so onto the sighting of the Tsalala female. One of the rangers found tracks of a lone lioness crossing through the Sand River, roughly around Finfoot Crossing. They then followed those tracks heading along the river and eventually came across an enormous kudu bull carcass. Lying next to the carcass was the Tsalala female. So she had in fact returned back to her roots, back to Londolozi, after a pretty lengthy absence. She headed further west, mated with the plains camp males, had some cubs, and very seldomly returned back to Londolozi. Through a few tragic events, she's now lost all of her 3 cubs. So she then set off on a semi-nomadic lifestyle where she is now hugging the river, moving up and down, avoiding conflict with any other lions. And this is an area that she knows incredibly well, having traversed it extensively while she was with her mother, as well as after her mother died and she now roamed up and down by herself. So she probably stalked in there, got close to the kudu, surprised it, caught it, just showing or highlighting her incredible strength and hunting prowess, which she very likely inherited from her mother, who was also a phenomenal hunter and had been known to have brought down a pretty sizable buffalo all by herself. That was when this lioness was a matter of 5 or 6 months old, and her siblings then fed on that carcass for quite some time, so that was great. She's now brought this kudu down, and apart from just the sheer size of this kudu, it's just remarkable to have her back on Londolozi. So she was busy feeding on the carcass. It was getting very dark and late, and we didn't want to put any extra or unnecessary pressure on her with our vehicle or our spotlight drawing in any hyenas that would then definitely steal the carcass. We then returned the following morning to find her still in the area. So she had managed to hold on to the carcass throughout the night. However, she had dragged the carcass a fair distance from where it was last night. That was most likely in an attempt to move it away from the river. Maybe a crocodile could come and try and snag it or take a piece of it. But also she probably wants to hide it from the eyesight of any vultures overhead. And by tucking it in underneath a bush, she essentially keeps it safe from that. So we watched her then now dragging this carcass, that phenomenal strength of hers, to pull this all the way across and eventually stash it under a bush. So just seeing the Tsalala female is unbelievable. I cannot believe she's back here, and all the hardships she's been through, and just to see what state she's in. So we are very closely attached to her, and we hope to see her around on Londolozi quite a bit more going forward. Anyway, on to the next sighting, was up in the north. We had decided to bumble around there, deciding to drive along some of the less frequently driven roads. And lo and behold, the Makomsava female walked out into the road in front of us. The last time I saw the Makomsava female was in 2020. She had a litter of cubs denning close to Southern Cross Koppies, and she then decided to get those cubs and move north of our boundary. Sadly, she lost both of those cubs, and she's been spending a lot more time north of our northern boundary. She has come back onto Londolozi a bit more in the last few months, but I just haven't seen her myself. Right now, she is currently denning some cubs that are believed to be about a week to 2 weeks old. And just the way she was behaving, by dropping down into a riverbed, made us believe that she was most likely going back to a den. She had a very full belly, so she's probably coming from a carcass, having fed on something, and could be going back to the cubs to nurse. She did stop and scent mark a few times before dropping down into that riverbed, and we followed her for a fair distance, as far as we could, before she then ducked off to the side. We were unable to follow her in a vehicle, and after some time we then got off and started to track her to see exactly where she went. And her tracks led straight up to a termite mound, which we then later discovered that was definitely not a den, but is very likely to be a future den. There wasn't any strong evidence for us to believe that she was keeping her cubs there, but she could have been on a little mission trying to find a den to move her cubs to in the future. So fingers crossed that we get to see the Makomsava female a little bit more, and that she brings her cubs onto Londolozi, because that would be a pretty awesome little endeavour for us to then venture into the north and try and see a little bit more of her, and I guess get to view some more leopard cubs, which nobody's going to complain about. The next sighting is of the Ximungwe female. We knew that she was now denning some cubs. On the 25th of October, Kelsey Clark and her guests followed the Ximungwe female across a crest, very heavily pregnant, and with one thing on her mind. A duiker darted away from her. She didn't even flinch looking at that. She did not scent mark. She arrived back at some boulders, walked up over into the boulders and disappeared. I don't think I could get more excited this morning. We knew the Ximungwe female was pregnant. She's just walked into a little cluster of boulders right on the central sort of parts of the reserve and hasn't come out. She was looking pregnant when she walked in, so she could very likely be in the process of giving birth right now. We're going to go and sit there and hopefully get a view of her with a much emptier stomach. Kelsey sat there for 5 or 6 hours, didn't see or hear a thing. I then came out a little bit later on. I heard a little grumbling and growling inside the den. Inside the rocks, we didn't know it was a den. But it turns out that she was very likely giving birth while we were sitting there. We then put up a camera trap, hoping to capture her coming and going from the den, and hopefully see her moving her cubs to a new den if she did move them. However, there was obviously a little gap in where she was entering or leaving the den, because neither of the 2 camera traps that we put up captured her moving the cubs away. After some time, we then stopped seeing her frequenting that den, leading us to the assumption that she had moved them to a new den. So, a few of the rangers then found her, followed her for quite some time until she then caught and killed a duiker. We then joined later on after she had already fed on the duiker. It was getting quite warm, but we decided we were going to sit it out with her to see if she then went back to some cubs. Not so long after we arrived, she then got up and set off on a mission in the direction of an area that is very densely populated with the perfect den sites for a leopard. She walked past some, dropped down into a drainage line, up the other side, around the corner, all over the show, going past multiple different dens. Before the presence of a male leopard in the area caught her attention, which obviously sidetracked her mission going back to her den. So we sat there with her for a while, hoping that she would then ditch the male, which was most likely the Nsuku male. I didn't get any footage of it, but we at least saw him running off into the distance. He is quite a skittish young male. It was just pretty risky having a male leopard close on her tail, and she wouldn't want to go back to the den if he was still around, because he's going to follow her, and she doesn't want him to kill those cubs, because he very likely could kill them. The following morning, she had lost that carcass and was found very far away from that area, heading in the direction of a den that she had used to den the Ntomi male. And so, a little spoiler alert, we have found the den. I'm not going to show you now. You're going to have to stay tuned for a future video on that. But this is some very exciting news that we have found the Ximungwe female's den, and hopefully we get some pretty cool viewing of her going forward. Finally, the last and probably most exciting sighting. It was late in the afternoon. Some of the rangers heard some lions calling from close to our causeway. So we raced across to get there to find the Ndzhenga males now responding to the roars of the plains camp males further west of them. The Ndzhenga males were charging in that direction. It was a bit of a flurry of chaos. We now all of a sudden had the plains camp males run past our vehicle, being followed pretty closely by the Ndzhenga males. Now in the build up to this, I would have expected the plains camp males to hold their own against the Ndzhenga males. They are a little bit bigger, however they were retreating, now running back west. The Ndzhenga males were now hot on their tail, roaring, driving home their authority.
Let's help these two.
Not now, they know where to retreat. Right here.
The Ndzengas are roaring, are the ones that are roaring, and plains camp are just quiet. Yes.
Eventually, as the Ndzhenga males were closing in, one of them let off a little grunt, which caught the attention of the plains camp males, and it was at that moment, after almost chatting amongst themselves through also a form of growling amongst them, the plains camp males then turned around and wanted to face the Ndzhenga males front on. And they charged in there at them. The Ndzhenga males saw what was coming and they spun on a dime and turned to retreat. smaller Ndzhenga male bolted down to the river and he disappeared. The bigger Ndzhenga male ran for his life, with the plainscap males hot on his tail. But thankfully they managed to get away. Don't know how, but for the Ndzhenga males, it was a very close call. And so after that, satisfied that they had driven the Ndzhenga males back east, the plainscap males then turned and began a very slow retreat, roaring as they disappeared into the distance. The Ndzhenga males settled down not too far away and also continued to roar. So I guess, thankfully for all the lions and the lion dynamics around here, that no physical altercation actually went down. But just to see male lions charging in, chasing after each other, turning and running, it was just unbelievable to be a part of that. And so I hope for the sake of all the lions around here, that peace will continue to prevail and that there is no physical altercation between these lions in the near future, because it could be pretty costly. And we know what happens after coalitions are killed off. It means that the cubs and all the females will be the sad collateral damage after that. But anyway, what an exhilarating week. We've had so much going on here, and these are just some of the highlights. So I hope you've enjoyed this virtual safari. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already, and we'll see you all again next week. But thanks for watching, and stay tuned for that video on the Ximungwe female's den. We cannot wait to share some of the footage of the cubs with you.